Typically, we want to get all of our different layers arranged and merged in before we start to deal with color correction. And that way, even if we're color correcting, for example, a beauty pass under the occlusion, we can see how it looks with the occlusion over it. What I'll do is start to color correct my images, using color correct and grade nodes and masking them by my different mask passes. I'll start out with the dusk image. In this case, I'm going to punch up the colors as it's a little muddy looking, and then I'll mask out some of the plants and other pieces. To start, I'll click on Merge To, and right now it's set to a multiply. I'll press G for grade, and this allows me to grade an image based on black point, white point, and so on. I find it's a handy node for, well, grading, overall affecting the look of the image before I deal in specifics and color correction. I'm going to take the overall gamma up just a little bit to lighten the image, and this gives me a little more luminance in there, making the inside lights a little brighter. Then I'll pull back gain just a little bit, which darkens it back, and this way I have a little more contrast going. We grade footage on ingest a lot of times when we take in footage and we need to tune it to a certain look, or maybe alter the white point so that, for example, our fluorescent lights don't make everything look green. Now that I've graded it, I'm going to put in a color correction by pressing C, and the color correct puts itself between grade and viewer 1. Now color correct specifically, and this is where I'll start to bring in the masks. I'll bring over my object ID, pulling it over where I can find it easily, and when we view it, pressing 1 to show it, we can see that the siding is bright green, the plants are all red, and most of the rest of the scene is blue. For example, to color correct the siding, I'll mask the color correct by the green. Here's how this works. I'll select it, press 1, and drag the mask on the side of the color correct onto that object ID EXR. Now with that color correction going, it's masking by, well, alpha initially. I'll go to the ranges in the color correction, and here in the mask I'll set it to RGBA green, masking by the green channel. I'll give an extreme example of how this mask is working. When I push up gamma to a ridiculous amount, we can see it's just taking the siding. It's a traveling mask, meaning that this mask moves with it because it's a rendering of the same thing seen through the camera. And so wherever we go in the scene, this siding will be masked and show correctly in our images. Now, I don't want to take my siding and bleach it like that, so I'll return the gamma to 1. What I might want to do, though, is in the shadow gamma on the siding, just push it up a little bit so it's not quite as dark. I'll bring up the midtones just a little, and then I'll pop out the highlights in that siding so that variation in the siding really shows. We can also push the color around or even desaturate just a bit, pulling a little bit of the color out of the midtones so the grays really show. I'm color correcting specifically by a mask here and affecting just that object, leaving everything else alone. It's very reasonable to see multiple color corrections stacked on. For example, taking care of the plants. I'll press C again and reference that same image by dragging the mask arrow onto that object ID EXR, and in this case, in color correct 2, I'm going to color correct by RGBA red. Now in color correction, I can take these plants and I'm going to just dim them back a little bit overall, but bring up their saturation, emphasizing that dusky tone on them. I'll also go into the plants and in the midtones, move around where those colors are, maybe desaturating the green just a little bit. I'll click on the color wheel in the midtone saturation and pull back the green just a touch, leaving them a little more blue tone just in the mids. I might also do this in the master saturation, again, opening up the color wheel and backing off the green to just pull out a little bit of color. Because it's masked very specifically by the red, we get some very, very subtle effects on those. I'll back off the luminance just a little bit, and now I've got a little more depth where those plants were screaming green. Now they read as much darker in the middle. It's a powerful tool, being able to color correct or mask by a certain channel, and this is why we want to render out, well, as many mask passes as we can think of, so that we have the ability later to say, let's tune this just a little bit, and easily pull a channel from a mask into a color correction and color correct, well, to our heart's content. I'll do the same kind of thing over on the daylight image. Again, because I'm working in a parallel flow, I'll use that same mask image. You can also duplicate it if you want, copying and pasting the read node if your flow starts to get a little confusing. And I'll take that approach by selecting that object ID, copying, pressing Ctrl-C, pasting, and now I'll start to color correct the daylight image. Again, I'm going to pick this and grade and just push the color around a little bit. I think I'll use a grade node that's masked this time. What I'll do is grab the mask on the grade, drop it onto that copy of the object ID, and in the grade here I'm going to mask by RGBA green. Now when I push around, for example, gamma on the grade, just the siding comes up, and I can black it out or make it very bright. I'll bring up the gamma on the grade on that siding just a little bit so it's not quite as deep. Remember, we always want flexibility, and whatever we can bring in to help us be flexible in our compositing workflow will get us not necessarily smaller files because we end up with a lot of them, but a smoother artistic process at the end when we're trying to fine-tune and add polish, and we want to do it with a much shorter render time.